Toby just bit me because I tried to throw out a cardboard box. That was the first sentence I yelled at my sister over the phone, and I meant every word. It wasn't a full bite, more of a nip. But still, Toby, my 12-year-old golden retriever, who once backed away from a cricket because it looked at him funny, had just lunged when I tried to toss an old box into the recycling bin. That's not normal dog behavior. Not for Toby. It all started early this morning. I'd been meaning to clean out the garage for months and finally had a Saturday with no obligations. Coffee in hand, flannel sleeves rolled up, I started pulling out boxes, bags, and forgotten holiday decor. There were cobwebs in the corners and a faint whiff of engine oil, but nothing I couldn't tackle. Toby, as usual, padded behind me with that goofy grin of his, tail swishing like a metronome. He loved keeping me company, even if he mostly sat and watched. I had just gotten through the stack of storage bins marked "Old School Stuff" when I saw it. A plain, beat-up cardboard box with no markings. Nothing written on it, not even a smudge of Sharpie. Just there, dusty and misshapen. I nudged it with my foot, and the corner gave way with a damp crunch. Definitely garbage. Toby barked, loud, sudden, made me jump. "Relax, buddy," I said, reaching for the box. "Just some trash." He leapt between me and the bin. I froze. He growled, not playfully, not like when he was younger and trying to tug a rope from my hands. This was different. His lips curled, eyes locked onto mine. Then he lunged. It wasn't an attack, not really. More like he was saying, "No, don't you dare!" His teeth grazed my wrist as I pulled away. I dropped the box. Toby immediately settled back, lying down beside it, placing one big paw on the lid. That's when I called Susan. "Are you bleeding?" she asked. "Barely. It's not the bite. It's what made him do it. He's never done that. Not once." Susan paused. "What's in the box?" "I don't know. That's the thing. He won't let me near it." "Well, don't throw it out. Bring it inside. Let him guard it if he wants to. Maybe he remembers something." I laughed. "What, like a doggy time capsule?" "Don't mock the dog. He clearly knows something." So I brought the box inside. Toby followed right behind me, still keeping that paw protectively over the top. I set it down in the corner of the living room and went to clean up the minor scrape. When I came back, he was lying there, guarding it like it held the Holy Grail. The rest of the day passed with me trying to ignore the box and failing miserably. I watched football, vacuumed the upstairs bedrooms, washed the dishes by hand, which I never do, all while sneaking glances at Toby, who never left his post. He didn't growl anymore, but he'd look up sharply any time I even stepped close. By dinner time, I caved. I sat down a few feet away and tried to talk to him. "What is it, buddy? Why is that thing so important? You know I wouldn't throw out anything special on purpose." He looked at me, then nudged the box with his nose. "You want me to open it now?" Tail wag. I took a deep breath and slid over. Inch by inch, like the thing might explode. Toby didn't object this time. He just stayed close, eyes locked on my hands. I peeled the top open. It made a crackling sound, damp and old, like the cardboard had been sitting through a couple seasons of forgotten garage humidity. Inside were layers of yellowed newspaper, folded carefully. And beneath that, a red flannel blanket I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Toby let out a soft whine. The blanket looked just like the one Dad used to keep in his old truck, the one I thought Mom threw out after he passed. I pulled it out gently. Toby sniffed it and gave a low, content bark. There was more underneath. An old photo album, sealed in a plastic freezer bag. a squeaky toy shaped like a squirrel, Toby's first toy from when we brought him home. I held it up, and he gave it a weak squeak back. Then, at the very bottom, a small velvet box. It wasn't dusty like the others. It looked newer, or at least well preserved. My heart beat faster. I opened it. Inside was Dad's watch. Not just any watch, the one he wore every single day of his life, the one we searched for after the funeral and assumed had been lost when he collapsed on that hiking trip. I couldn't stop the gasp. My hands shook. Toby nudged me, whimpering. That sound, he hadn't made it since the day we buried Dad. "Oh my God, Toby," I whispered. "You remembered. You saved this." I sank to the floor. Memories flooded back. Rides in Dad's truck with the windows down, and the flannel blanket over my lap. Toby sticking his nose out the window. The squeaky squirrel toy lodged under the seat. All of it wrapped up in this forgotten box. I don't know how it ended up buried under junk in the garage. Maybe I tucked it away during the fog after Dad's death and forgot. Maybe Mom did, hoping to preserve it. But Toby didn't forget. That night, I let him curl up beside me on the couch with the blanket. He fell asleep with his head on my lap and the squeaky toy between his paws. I didn't sleep much. I kept looking over at the box, the photo album, the watch. It felt like a message from the past, or maybe just a reminder that some things and some dogs remember love even when we forget. Tomorrow, I'd go through the photo album, but tonight, I'd just sit with Toby and be grateful for the kind of love that never throws anything away. The next morning started with the kind of stillness that felt sacred. I woke up to the warmth of Toby pressed against my legs, his breathing slow and steady. The red flannel blanket still covered us both, and the squeaky squirrel lay right beside his paw like a little sentinel. I didn't want to move, didn't want to break the quiet, but sunlight was already sneaking through the blinds, and life, as it always does, was inching forward. I gently slid out from under the blanket and stood. Toby stirred, stretched his legs out with a lazy yawn, then slowly got to his feet. He looked up at me with that familiar expression, half curiosity, half sleepy affection, and padded behind me as I walked to the kitchen to start coffee. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Susan. "Any updates on your haunted box? Or has Toby reclaimed it as his kingdom?" I chuckled and texted back, "Turns out the box was full of memories. I'll tell you more later." Once the coffee was ready, I poured a cup and stood in front of the old box, which was now tucked neatly under the coffee table. The velvet box with Dad's watch was on top, still closed. The photo album lay beside it, just where I'd left it. I hesitated before reaching for it. Something about opening it felt heavy, like I was inviting a wave that might crash too hard, but Toby sat expectantly beside me, tail wagging slow and steady. I took it as permission. I unzipped the freezer bag and pulled out the photo album. The plastic was a bit stiff from time, but the album inside looked remarkably well preserved. It was brown leather with gold-trimmed edges, the kind Dad liked to keep around for big occasions. I opened it to the first page. It hit like a punch and a hug all at once. A photo of me at maybe 4 or 5, standing in front of Dad's old blue truck, holding Toby as a puppy. My overalls were covered in grass stains, and Toby had one ear flopped over, tongue hanging out in bliss. Dad stood behind us with a proud grin, hand on my shoulder. Mom must have taken the photo. There was a date scribbled on the corner. June 2009. I flipped the page. Toby's first bath. me squealing with laughter while he splashed around in a plastic tub in the backyard. Then a photo of Dad teaching me how to toss a baseball, Toby trying to catch it mid-air like it was meant for him. Page after page of sunlit afternoons, birthday parties, camping trips, each one a piece of a world I hadn't revisited in years. Toby rested his chin on my knee as I turned the pages. Every so often, he'd let out a soft little grunt or sigh, like he was remembering too. I stopped at a photo that was different. It was a snapshot of an unfamiliar room. Not our house, not Grandma's. It was a wood-paneled room with a stone fireplace and a green recliner. Dad sat in the chair, holding me in one arm and Toby in the other. The date on the back said December 2013. "Do you remember this place?" I asked Toby. He perked up. I stared at the background. There was a painting above the fireplace, mountains and a lake. I didn't recognize it, but it stuck in my mind. Something about the room felt important. I snapped a photo with my phone and sent it to Susan. "Do you know where this was?" She responded almost immediately. "Wait, that looks like Grandpa Charlie's old cabin in Pinefield. We used to go there every winter. Remember?" I didn't. But Toby stood up and walked over to the front door. "You want to go?" I asked. He barked once. I couldn't believe it. This dog was connecting memories I didn't even know I had. Maybe he was following scent cues, or maybe it was something deeper. Either way, I wasn't about to ignore it. I called Susan. "Do you still have directions to Grandpa's cabin?" She paused. "You're not seriously thinking of driving up there today, are you?" "I think I have to. There's something in these pictures. Toby remembers." Okay. Yeah, I've got the address saved. I'll text it. Just be careful. It's been years since anyone's been up there." Half an hour later, Toby and I were packed into my pickup with some snacks, a jug of water, and the photo album. The air was crisp, and the sky cloudless. As we drove, Toby sat alert in the passenger seat, head up, eyes bright. It took about 2 hours to reach Pinefield. The road wound through the woods, lined with towering pines and the occasional mailbox leaning like it had been forgotten. When I saw the old wooden sign for Pine Hollow Cabin Road, I turned off. The cabin was still standing. A bit weathered, with moss creeping along the shingles and vines trying to claim the front porch. But it was solid, familiar. Like time had paused and waited for us to return. Toby jumped down from the truck and walked straight to the front steps. No hesitation, I followed, key in hand. Susan had reminded me that the spare was probably still hidden in the flower pot by the door. She was right. Inside, the place smelled like cedar and old books. Dust floated in shafts of sunlight, and the air was cool but not unpleasant. Everything was exactly how it looked in the photo. The recliner, the stone fireplace, the painting. Toby walked around the room once, then sat directly in front of the fireplace and looked up. I stared at the painting. There was something behind it. I climbed onto the arm of the recliner and lifted the frame gently. Behind it was a small hollow cut into the wood. Inside, a tin box, just big enough to hold some papers. I pulled it out. There were letters inside, all addressed to me, from Dad. My breath caught in my throat. I sat down slowly, tin box in my lap, Toby resting beside me like he'd known all along. The first envelope was dated the week before his final hiking trip. My hands trembled. I opened it. "If you're reading this, I hope it means you're older, maybe even stronger than you feel right now. I wanted you to have something to hold on to if I couldn't be there. Something to remind you that you were always the best part of my day. I had to stop reading. The tears came too fast. Toby nosed my hand and licked my cheek. We sat there for hours. I read letter after letter. Each one was a reminder of the father I missed. The childhood I thought had slipped too far into the past. Each one had stories, lessons, jokes, memories. A few even included little sketches of Toby as a pup. When I finished, I looked down at Toby. "You brought me here. You brought me back." He barked once, then curled up at my feet. That night, we stayed in the cabin. I made a fire in the hearth, used some of the old wood stacked on the porch. I wrapped us both in that red flannel blanket and fell asleep listening to the crackle of flames and the slow rhythm of Toby's breathing. The box wasn't just a box. It was a map. And somehow, this old dog had remembered every stop. Morning at the cabin didn't come with a rooster crowing or birds chirping. It came with Toby pressing his wet nose against my cheek and letting out a quiet but insistent huff. The fire had long since burned down to glowing coals, and my back ached slightly from sleeping on the floor with only the blanket between me and the rug. But I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept so deeply. The letters were still beside me, neatly stacked back in their tin box. The last one I'd read the night before had been different. It had a list scribbled on the back in Dad's handwriting. 3 bullet points. I remembered them clearly. 1. Toby's squirrel. 2. The flannel. 3. Pine Hollow cabin. It felt like a scavenger hunt he never got to finish. Or maybe something he hoped I'd uncover someday. After breakfast, instant oatmeal cooked on the old stovetop and coffee made with questionable grounds I found in the cupboard, I leashed up Toby and stepped outside. The air was fresh and cold, the kind that cleared your lungs and brought color to your cheeks. Toby bounded down the porch steps like he was 10 years younger. There was a path behind the cabin that led into the woods. I vaguely remembered hiking it with Dad when I was little, and it seemed like Toby remembered it too. He took the lead, nose to the ground, moving with purpose. We walked for nearly half an hour in comfortable silence. The forest was still, but not empty. Squirrels darted up trees. Leaves rustled under our feet. The sunlight streamed through the branches above in golden shafts. Then, without warning, Toby stopped. He barked once and sat. Right in front of us was a fallen log, half rotted and blanketed in moss. At first, I didn't see anything unusual about it. Then I noticed a small wooden sign nailed to a tree nearby. The paint was faded, but I could still make it out. Memory spot. A rush of recognition hit me. Dad had called this place our secret fort. We used to come here during summer trips to Pinefield and build imaginary worlds with sticks and pine cones. Toby would lie in the sun and let me drape leaves over him like camouflage. I sat on the log, and Toby laid down beside me. It felt almost ceremonial. Then I spotted something under the roots of a tree a few feet away, a small tin lunchbox, rusted, but still sealed. My heart skipped. I picked it up and pried it open. Inside was a collection of small objects. A toy compass, a plastic sheriff's badge, a folded piece of blue construction paper with a child's scrawl that read, "Toby's Adventure Club." Beneath that, a folded note in Dad's writing. "If you find this, it means you followed the trail. And if you followed the trail, it means you still believe in the magic we made. Don't ever lose that." I laughed through the tears. How had I forgotten all of this? We stayed there a while, soaking it in. The forest, the quiet, the reminder of who I was before the noise of life got too loud. Then Toby stood, stretched, and started walking again. I followed. We looped back to the cabin, where I made lunch and wrote down everything we'd found so far. There had to be more. I remembered the letters, the list, Toby's squirrel, the flannel, Pine Hollow. All three were here. But why did it feel like we hadn't finished? In the late afternoon, I decided to check the attic. I didn't even know the cabin had one until I spotted the pull-down stairs in the hallway ceiling. Dust rained down as I tugged the cord. Toby sat at the bottom of the ladder, wagging his tail. The attic was small and cramped, with a slanted roof and stacks of boxes. Most were filled with old winter clothes, board games, and yellowing magazines. But in the far corner, there was a box that looked newer. I opened it. Inside was a VHS tape in a clear plastic case. The label said, "For future laughs." Next to it, a small portable VHS player with a Post-it stuck on top. Needs charging. Plug-in kitchen. I carried everything downstairs and plugged in the player. While it charged, I took Toby out back and threw his squeaky squirrel a few times. He fetched it like a pup, though he took longer to bring it back. I didn't mind. When we went inside, the light on the VHS player blinked green. I slid in the tape and hit play. The screen flickered, then showed a shot of Dad holding the camera, grinning. "All right, sport," he said, turning it toward me. "Tell the camera what we're doing today." My young voice piped up, high and enthusiastic. "We're building a memory box, so we remember everything when we're old and boring." Dad laughed. "Speak for yourself. I plan on being young and boring." The video jumped between scenes. Me and Toby playing in the woods, Dad helping me build a birdhouse, the three of us roasting marshmallows by the fire. Then, it cut to a quiet moment. Dad sat alone, looking into the camera. "If you ever find this," he said, his voice soft, "it means time's past. Maybe I'm not around. Maybe you're older. Maybe Toby's an old man by now. But I hope this brought a smile to your face." I paused the tape. Toby was lying beside me, head resting on the tin box of letters. I looked down at him. "You knew. Somehow, you knew." That evening, Susan called. "How's the emotional treasure hunt going?" I told her everything. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, maybe you should turn this into something, like a book or something, or a video. This is the kind of thing people need to hear." I hadn't thought of that, but now that she said it, the idea didn't feel crazy. I looked over at Toby, still watching me, still guarding every memory. Maybe he was guiding me toward more than just boxes and letters. Maybe he was guiding me back to myself. It rained all night, and by the time morning rolled in, the ground around the cabin was soft and damp, the forest floor spongy underfoot. I watched the mist drift between the trees as I sipped coffee on the porch, wrapped in the red flannel blanket. Toby sat beside me like a statue, watching the same fog as if it were a movie. The calm was only on the surface. Inside, my head was buzzing. Dad's letters, the tape, the memory spot in the woods, it all felt like we were following a breadcrumb trail. I couldn't shake the feeling there was one more piece left to find, something we hadn't uncovered yet. After breakfast, I spread the photo album, letters, and notes on the cabin table. I flipped through the pages again, slowly this time. I was looking for clues, dates, patterns, places. And then, about halfway through the album, I noticed a photo I'd passed before, but hadn't really absorbed. It was Dad, sitting on a dock. I was maybe 7, sitting beside him with my legs dangling over the edge. Toby was in the water, paddling toward us. In the background, a wooden boathouse with a faded sign that read, Stillwater. Stillwater. That wasn't the name of the lake near Pinefield. It was somewhere else. I remembered the name faintly, something from another vacation, maybe a long weekend we took during a school break. I looked back through Dad's letters. One of them, dated a few months before his accident, mentioned a trip to Stillwater. He'd written, "If you ever find your way back to Stillwater, check the North Dock. We left a little something there, just in case." My pulse picked up. Pulse picked. I opened my laptop and searched for Stillwater in the state registry, a small lake about an hour and a half south. Public access, a few cabins around the shoreline, and, according to an old photo on a tourism page, a boathouse that looked exactly like the one in the picture. I turned to Toby. "Want to go for another ride?" He barked once, then headed to the door. The drive to Stillwater was quiet. Toby rode with his head out the window, ears flapping, nose twitching at the wind. As we pulled into the gravel lot near the boat launch, he jumped out before I could grab the leash. He took off running, right toward the North Dock. I jogged after him, heart pounding. The dock was aged, but sturdy. Wooden planks creaked under my feet. Toby stopped at the edge and sat down, staring at the boathouse. I followed his gaze. There was a small wooden box tucked beneath the railing. Barely visible, wedged between the dock posts. I knelt and pried it loose. The hinges were rusted, but it opened with a pop. Inside was a folded paper map and a sealed envelope with my name on it. I sat down on the dock beside Toby and opened the envelope first. "If you found this, it means you kept following the trail. It means you still believe in chasing memories. There's one last place I want you to go, back to where it all began, the house where you first met Toby. There's something in the yard we never told you about." My heart swelled. That house wasn't far. After Dad passed, we sold it, and I hadn't been back since. But I remembered every inch of the backyard, the tire swing, the old tree house, the patch of clover Toby used to roll in until he was green all over. I thanked the lake out loud, like it had been guarding the secret for all these years. Then we drove. The house looked the same from the front, though the shutters were now blue instead of green. I parked across the street and stared for a moment. It felt surreal. I knocked on the door and explained everything to the current owner, a man in his 60s named Ray. To my surprise, he smiled warmly and invited me in. "You know," he said, "sometimes I see that dog of yours sitting by the tree out back. Didn't know if he was visiting or remembering." We stepped into the backyard. Toby ran straight to the old treehouse stump and began sniffing wildly around it. Ray watched with interest. "Dig if you need to. That dog seems to know more than we ever will." I found an old garden trowel in the shed and started digging where Toby scratched. A few inches down, the metal clinked. I cleared the dirt away and uncovered a small, rusted metal chest. I lifted it out and opened it carefully. Inside were a few of my childhood drawings, a baseball glove, and a bundle of letters wrapped in twine. There was also a notebook labeled Toby's Journal. I flipped it open. Day 1, Toby came home. He licked my ear and stole my sock. Mom says he's a good judge of character. I think he knows I'm his. Tears came fast. Entry after entry recorded my growing up through Dad's eyes, first days of school, bike rides, sleepovers, and always Toby. I sat under the tree for hours reading. Toby lay beside me, head on my foot, tail thumping every so often. When the sun started to dip behind the rooftops, Ray brought out 2 glasses of lemonade. "I think your dad knew," he said. "He knew you'd come back, and he knew that dog would show you how." That night, I didn't drive back to the cabin. I booked a small motel nearby. Toby curled up on the bed beside me and snored softly. There were still more pages to read, more photos to look through, more places Toby remembered that I hadn't even thought of yet. Whatever this journey was, it wasn't over. Not yet. And Toby wasn't done leading the way. The motel room smelled like cheap detergent and lemon-scented disinfectant, but I didn't care. Toby was snoring softly on the second bed, curled into the same tight little ball he used to make as a pup. His squirrel toy was tucked under his front paws like a treasure. I sat cross-legged with the notebook from the backyard chest open on the comforter, reading Dad's handwriting by the dim yellow light of a bedside lamp. Each page was a day, sometimes 2, a mix of memories and reflections. Some were simple, lists of funny things I'd said, or what Toby had done that week, but others read like quiet confessions. It was like peeling back a part of Dad I never saw when he was alive. The kind of things you write down for someone because you know you won't always be able to say them. One entry stood out. It was dated a few weeks before Toby's first birthday. "Toby always waits at the front door when you go to school. He watches the sidewalk until your bus turns the corner, then curls up with your sock on the rug. That dog doesn't just love you. He guards your joy like it's his job. Someday if you forget who you are or what matters, follow him. He'll bring you home." I read it 3 times. The weight of it sank deep into my chest. Toby had never stopped doing that. Through every move, every loss, every forgotten memory, he was still doing it. The next morning, we walked. Nowhere in particular. The town had changed, but there were still familiar pieces here and there. The bakery with the crooked window frame. The old fountain at the center of the park, where I used to toss pennies and make wishes I couldn't remember anymore. I let Toby lead. He tugged the leash gently, like he had somewhere in mind. We walked past rows of quiet houses until he stopped in front of a white picket fence and sniffed the air. It was the McAllister's house. I hadn't thought about them in years. Their son Tyler was my best friend growing up, and we used to spend entire summers running through sprinklers and digging holes in the backyard, convinced we'd strike treasure. The house had aged, but the big maple tree in the front yard was the same. Its branches stretched high and wide, still holding the homemade swing we helped hang when we were 10. I wasn't sure what made Toby stop here, but I unlatched the gate and walked to the base of the tree. I remembered burying something here with Tyler, a box of super important secrets, as we'd called them. I crouched down and brushed aside leaves and twigs, expecting nothing. But then Toby began digging. It didn't take long before I heard a familiar scrape, wood against metal. I joined him, pulling out an old tin lunchbox sealed with masking tape. Inside were a bunch of scribbled notes, plastic army men, marbles, and a tiny toy flashlight that somehow still worked. Tyler and I had written down things like, "Our best day ever," "Worst school lunch," and "How to find the best climbing trees." We'd even made an oath to always be friends, no matter what. I was laughing when the front door opened. A woman stepped out, maybe in her 40s. "Can I help you?" I stood and brushed the dirt off. "Sorry, I used to live next door. I'm just visiting. I think I left part of my childhood under your tree." She smiled. "You must be Jack. Tyler's talked about you. He moved to Oregon a few years back, but he still brings you up sometimes. You were kind of a legend here." I told her about the box, and she invited me in for coffee. Her name was Lorna. Her parents bought the house from the McAllisters, and she remembered playing with Tyler's younger cousins when she was a kid. She let me sit on the porch with Toby while I sipped coffee and flipped through the box. The last note in the tin wasn't written by me or Tyler. It was from Dad. If you find this, it means your dog has a better memory than either of you. Go to the fairgrounds. Look behind the red booth where you won your first ribbon. There's one more thing waiting. I stared at the paper. The town fairgrounds. I hadn't been there since I was 13. That was the year I entered Toby in the kids' dog show. He'd won a ribbon for friendliest face, and I remembered him parading around with it like he'd taken home Olympic gold. Toby stood the moment I picked up the leash. The fairgrounds were deserted. The event season was long over, and the place had the peaceful, ghostly feel of somewhere waiting for summer to come back. We walked past the empty booths and grandstand until we reached the red booth. Behind it, partially buried under a tangle of weeds, was a small plastic bin sealed with duct tape. I pulled it free and opened it right there on the gravel. Inside was the ribbon, still intact, a little wrinkled but bright as ever, and under it, a Polaroid photo. Me, holding up the ribbon, Toby jumping up beside me, mouth wide in a joyful bark. Dad was behind the camera. You could see his shadow stretching across the dirt. On the back, in marker, "This was the day you said you wanted to become someone dogs could be proud of. You already are." I couldn't speak. I sat down right there and pressed the photo to my chest. Toby curled up beside me and let out a satisfied grunt, like he'd been waiting for this moment to catch up to us. I stayed there for an hour, maybe more, watching the sky shift, letting the photo rest in my palm. Later that evening, back at the motel, I called Susan again, told her about the fairgrounds, the ribbon, the box at the old house. She was quiet for a long time. "It's not just memories, Jack. It's a map of who you've always been. Maybe Toby was never guarding that first box. Maybe he was guarding the person he knew you still were." I thought about that long after the call ended. There were still a few letters in the tin I hadn't opened, and who knew how many other stops Toby might still remember. Whatever was next, I wasn't in a rush. Some journeys are better when you take your time. And this one was led by the kind of love that never forgets. Toby started limping slightly the morning after we visited the fairgrounds. It wasn't much, just a subtle favoring of his right leg, but I noticed it right away. 12 years old was already a miracle for a dog his size, and with all the walking we'd been doing lately, it wasn't surprising. Still, something about seeing him slow down made my chest tighten. I shortened our morning walk to a gentle stroll around the block near the motel. Toby didn't protest, but he glanced back at the truck more than once, as if trying to tell me something. Back in the room, I refilled his water bowl and laid his favorite blanket down by the window. He settled in without complaint, though his eyes stayed trained on me. It felt like he was waiting for me to do something, to see something. I went back to the notebook. I reread the last few entries, searching for clues, for anything Dad might have hinted at that I'd missed. One paragraph stood out. It was a rambling memory about a spontaneous beach trip we took one spring, just the three of us. I'd forgotten it until reading this line. "You built a sandcastle the size of a car and crowned Toby as king of the shore. We buried a toy under it, said it was his royal treasure. You insisted we mark the spot with a driftwood X." I sat up straight. That beach wasn't far, just a couple hours south. I remembered it vaguely. A little-known spot near an old pier, usually empty except for seagulls and fishermen. Mom used to call it our secret coast. I looked over at Toby. What do you say, king of the shore? One more adventure? He lifted his head and wagged his tail twice. The drive was long, but beautiful. Spring had settled into the landscape, flowers along the highway, the breeze warm through the open windows. Toby laid down in the back seat this time, content to rest, but I kept checking the mirror to make sure he was comfortable. We reached the beach just after noon. It was exactly how I remembered. Quiet, windswept, and vast. The pier stood far off to the left, weather-beaten and noble. I parked and opened the door. Toby stepped out slowly, stretched, then sniffed the ocean air like he was greeting an old friend. We walked along the shore, following the same path we must have taken years ago. I tried to remember where we'd built that massive sand castle, what part of the beach it was on. Toby, however, didn't hesitate. He turned toward the dunes and trudged across the soft sand with purpose. Near a bend in the shoreline, where tall grasses bowed in the breeze, Toby stopped. He sniffed the ground, then looked at me. I knelt, brushing away sand and dried seaweed. My hands hit something hard, a flat piece of driftwood, cracked in the middle, but unmistakably shaped like an X. I dug with my hands, heart pounding. The sand gave way quickly, and soon I unearthed a small metal tin. Its edges were rusted, but it had held together. I popped it open. Inside was a faded plastic crown, one of those cheap party favors you get in birthday packs. Wrapped in it was a note sealed in a sandwich bag. I opened it. To the true king's loyal subject. If you're reading this, congratulations. You've reached the royal vault. Toby ruled this beach with wisdom and drool. May this treasure remind you that silly moments are sacred too. Don't take life too seriously, Jack. Laugh loud. Love big. Under the note was a photo. Me, covered in sand, wearing a crooked paper crown, holding Toby like he weighed nothing. My smile stretched from ear to ear. Dad must have taken it just before the tide came in. I sat back and looked at Toby. Do you remember? He licked my arm and plopped down in the sand, tail making soft brushes in the grit. We stayed until the tide started to rise, then walked back slowly, the sun warm on our backs. That night, I booked us into a dog-friendly cottage a few miles inland. It had a porch swing, a little fire pit, and big open windows that let the breeze carry the scent of pine and salt. Toby curled up in front of the fireplace and let out a deep, satisfied sigh. I lit a few candles and read the last entry in the notebook. If you've made it this far, you've remembered everything that matters, not because of the places, but because of the heart you carried into them. Toby knew. He always knew. And if you're reading this, then he still does. There's nothing else to find now, Jack. Just keep walking with him. Wherever he goes next, follow. He'll show you what love looks like. I closed the book and looked over at Toby. He opened one eye and wagged his tail once. Guess it's your story, too, I said softly. You're the one who led us here. He didn't need to respond. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. There would be more places, more moments, maybe not hidden treasures or sealed letters, maybe just quiet walks, slow mornings, and the kind of peace that only comes from knowing you've remembered something truly important. We weren't going home yet. There was still more road to travel, and Toby was still leading the way. The first thing I noticed the next morning wasn't the sunlight filtering through the window or the birds chirping outside. It was Toby, pawing gently at my arm, a low huff escaping his nose. His leash lay at the foot of the bed, untouched, but his eyes were fixed on the doorway, like he already knew where we were headed. After breakfast, I let him climb into the truck bed where I'd laid down extra padding. I didn't know exactly where we were going yet, but that was part of the magic now. Toby would know. I started the engine, glanced in the rearview mirror, and said, "All right, boss, you tell me." We left the beach town behind and drove inland, following roads I hadn't seen in years. I remembered some only by feel, muscle memory from childhood trips, Sunday drives, summer detours Dad would take just to see where they went. With every turn, every bump in the pavement, I caught flashes of old sights, a collapsed barn we once photographed during a thunderstorm, the roadside diner where Toby snuck a whole burger off Dad's plate, and the dusty gas station where Mom bought us popsicles in winter just to make us laugh. We pulled over just outside a town called Millersville. The sign looked freshly painted, but everything else felt untouched. I hadn't thought of this place in more than a decade. It wasn't on our usual vacation circuit. It was where we'd stopped when our car broke down one summer. We ended up staying the night in a little inn, while the local mechanic worked a miracle. I found the inn again, without needing directions. It was still there, a 2-story white house with green shutters and a wraparound porch. I parked across the street and sat in the driver's seat for a moment, unsure. Toby barked once, that same clear bark he used when he was absolutely certain. We walked up to the porch, and I knocked. A woman answered, late 50s maybe, hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She studied me for a second, then smiled. "You're one of the Fields boys, aren't you? You stayed here once with your dad, and that little golden pup." I blinked. "Yeah, I'm Jack. And this is Toby. You remember us?" "Of course. You helped me pick tomatoes out back. Your dad gave me that recipe for campfire cornbread I still use every 4th of July." We stood out on the porch, while she fetched a small photo album she kept behind the check-in desk. She flipped it open, and sure enough, there we were, me and Dad sitting on the porch swing, Toby sprawled across both our laps. We looked sunburned and tired, but happy. "There was a note," she said slowly, turning another page. "Your dad gave it to me before you left. Asked me to mail it to you someday, but I never got an address." She disappeared into a side room and returned with a small envelope, yellowed at the edges but still sealed. She handed it over. I opened it carefully. "Jack, if you ever come back here, it means you've been walking with Toby. That's good. That means you're still letting your heart guide you. Don't stop now. There's a place just outside town, Miller's Trail. We didn't get to hike it that summer. We ran out of time. But I wanted to go there with you. If you make it, take Toby. Finish that walk for us." It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. Toby had already stood up, his tail slow but insistent. Miller's Trail was a short drive from the inn, marked by a wooden sign barely taller than my chest. The parking area was just a patch of gravel beside a wooden post with trail maps and notices tacked to it. I grabbed our water bottle, a few dog treats, and the leash, though I didn't clip it on. The trail started with a gentle incline, winding through trees that whispered in the wind. It smelled like pine and wildflowers, and sunlight danced across the dirt path. Toby kept pace beside me, head low, ears alert. We hiked in silence for a while, passing mossy logs and dandelion patches. I tried to picture what this walk would have been like with Dad. He would have pointed out cloud shapes, or stopped to watch a line of ants cross the trail. I did those things now, for both of us. About halfway up, we reached a wooden bench carved with the initials M+T, probably lovers from long ago. Toby sat beside it, then stood and walked off the trail slightly, stopping at a thicket of wild blackberry bushes. He nosed around until he found a narrow path, half covered by vines. I followed. After a few minutes of ducking under branches, we stepped into a small clearing. It was round, like a natural room tucked into the forest, with a single flat rock in the center. On top was a sealed mason jar, capped in red wax. I picked it up. Inside was a rolled piece of paper. And beside it, floating in the jar like a relic, was a matchbox-sized compass. The kind you'd find in a kid's camping kit. I unscrewed the lid and opened the paper. Jack, wherever this ends, let it begin again. The compass is yours. You always knew the way. Love isn't about getting there. It's about walking it together. So walk it again, and again, and again. There were no instructions, no clues, just that. Toby sat in the clearing with his eyes closed, face tilted toward the breeze. We sat there for hours. When we finally made it back to the truck, the sun was low, and the world had quieted again. I didn't know where we were going next, but I didn't need to. Toby would lead me there, and this time I'd let him show me slowly. We drove without a map the next day, letting the road carry us the way a river carries driftwood. No force, no direction, just trust. Toby sat up front this time, resting his chin on the center console, eyes fixed on the road like he was studying every turn. I kept a hand near his back, not petting him exactly, just keeping contact. That kind of touch you used to say, "I'm still here." We passed through towns I'd never heard of, their names painted in faded script on welcome signs nailed to telephone poles. I stopped when Toby stood up and looked out the window, tail flicking. That was his new way of deciding. He'd look at something, and if it made his tail move, we pulled over. That's how we ended up in Halber Grove, a single stoplight town with a post office, 2 diners, and a feed store. We parked in front of the hardware shop. Toby hopped down, sniffed the pavement, and then took off. Not in a rush, just walking like he'd been here before. We passed a row of tidy houses, each with a porch and a wind chime, until we reached a white community center with a faded mural of kids playing tag. Toby stopped at the stairs and sat. Inside, it was quiet. A man behind the counter looked up and smiled. "You looking for the dog training class?" he joked. "No, just following him," I said. The man stood and walked around the counter, hands in his pockets. "Well, if he brought you here, he might be remembering the youth fair. That's what this place used to host, years ago. There's a photo wall down the hall, if you're curious." I nodded, and Toby followed me down a corridor lined with cork boards and event flyers. At the end, a large bulletin board held a grid of Polaroids under the heading Halber Grove Community Days, 2009 to 2015. Second row, 5th photo in. I spotted it. Me, holding up a certificate. Dad beside me, smiling proud. And Toby, tongue out, wearing a blue ribbon around his neck. I remembered the moment in a flash. A dog tricks contest. We'd practiced for days. He'd rolled over, played dead, even rang a bell with his paw. I took a photo of the photo and showed it to the guy at the counter. "Do you remember where they held the contests?" I asked. He scratched his chin. "Backfield, behind the center. There's a little garden plot now, but it used to be open space." Toby was already heading that way. Out back, the grass had grown tall in patches, and wildflowers poked through a crooked fence line. The air smelled like sun-warmed earth and clover. I watched Toby sniff around, zigzagging gently until he stopped at a shaded patch beneath an oak tree. I knelt beside him. The soil was soft. Something was buried here. I dug with my hands and unearthed a small wooden crate, maybe the size of a shoebox. The lid came loose easily. Inside was a laminated index card with our names written in bold black marker. Jack plus Toby, 2011 champions. Below it, a metal whistle on a leather string and a rolled piece of yellow paper. I opened the note. If you found this, you remembered how hard we laughed that day. How Toby tripped over his own tail and still won. You didn't care about winning. You just wanted him to feel proud. That's what makes you different, Jack. You've always been the kind of person dogs can trust. Never lose that. Toby nudged the whistle with his nose and let out a short bark. I laughed and hung it around his neck. We stayed in Halber Grove that night. The local diner gave us leftover roast beef on the house, and the motel just outside town welcomed dogs without extra charge. Toby slept deeply, one paw resting on the whistle like it was a medal. In the morning, I checked the old tin box of Dad's letters. There were 3 left. One of them said, "This one's for the day you're ready to say goodbye to a place you never wanted to leave. Not forever, just long enough to know how much it meant. Go to the Overlook, the one off Route 14. You'll remember it when you see it." The Overlook. I knew exactly the one he meant. A rest stop built into the side of a bluff, where the valley below spilled out like a quilt of green and gold. We'd stopped there every year on our way to visit Grandma. It wasn't fancy, just a stone bench and a chain-link fence. But it felt sacred. We made the drive in the afternoon, and when we arrived, the air was cooler, a breeze lifting the edges of my flannel. Toby walked straight to the edge of the platform and sat, tail thumping once. I sat beside him. We watched the wind ripple through the trees below, watched the clouds move like slow thoughts across the sky. I pulled out the letter again. It said, "This was the first place I realized I couldn't stop time. You were growing so fast. Toby, too. I remember watching you both run in circles until you were dizzy, and I wanted to press pause. But life doesn't pause, it moves. What matters is that you notice the view while you're in it. Sit here, breathe, and remember you were happy." We stayed until the sun sank behind the hills. That night, I found an old sleeping bag in the truck bed and laid it out behind the cab. Toby climbed up beside me. We slept under the stars, no ceiling, no roof, just sky. He snored a little, like always, and I fell asleep with my hand resting lightly on his back. Wherever we were going next, it didn't matter, because wherever Toby went, I'd follow. Toby woke up with a sneeze the next morning, his whole body jerking forward in that funny, dramatic way only dogs can pull off. I blinked awake, just in time to see him stretch long and low, tail wagging lazily. The sun was rising fast, casting warm gold across the valley, and for a long moment, we just sat there in silence, 2 figures on a truck bed beneath the sky, wrapped in yesterday's memories. The whistle around Toby's neck swung gently when he moved. He hadn't tried to pull it off once. I figured that meant he was proud of it. We drove south, back onto smaller roads, weaving past farms and forests. I hadn't planned anything, but that wasn't new. The plan, as always, was to follow Toby. By mid-morning, we rolled into a place called Grant Hollow. It wasn't even marked on the GPS, just a single grocery store, a chapel, and a weathered sign that read, "Welcome to the Hollow." Toby stirred in the seat, perked up at the chapel, then let out a low bark. I parked by the side and looked around. The chapel had a small bell tower and a garden in the back, enclosed by a wooden fence covered in ivy. It looked like something out of a storybook, with a gravel path that curved gently to the rear. We walked the path slowly. Toby sniffed the air and veered toward a patch of daisies. Just behind them, at the base of a maple tree, was a stone bench with names carved into it. Families, maybe. Loved ones. I wasn't sure why he'd brought us here until I spotted a narrow plaque on the wall nearby. It read, "In memory of the dogs who loved us, and the ones we still love." Toby stepped closer to the bench and lay down with a deep sigh. I sat beside him and rubbed behind his ears. I didn't cry, but something in me softened. The kind of ache that feels like gratitude. Inside the chapel, a man with silver hair was arranging hymnals. He looked up and gave me a smile. "Visitors from out of town?" "Just passing through," I said. "My dogs seem to know this place." The man chuckled. "They always do. This garden, people send ashes here. Mementos, too. We don't advertise it, but dogs seem to lead people here when the time's right." I nodded slowly. My dad might have brought us here once. I was too young to remember. He studied Toby for a moment. "That whistle. Was he in a youth contest?" I blinked. "Yeah, years ago." He smiled. "I used to judge one or two of those. That's a winner's whistle. I don't forget dogs like him." Before we left, I wrote a short note on a slip of paper and placed it behind the plaque. He's still leading me, still remembering what I forgot. Thank you for keeping a space like this alive. We hit the road again by midday. The second to last letter in Dad's tin box came next. "You're almost through, kiddo. If you've made it this far, then I hope you've laughed more than you've cried. One last stop before the end. The tree house." I knew exactly what he meant. Not the backyard one from our old house. That was long gone. He was talking about the one we built in the woods near the family cabin, a little farther north. The one hidden just far enough into the trees that it felt like a secret. It took a while to get there. The road curved like a question mark, and the truck didn't like the dirt path much. But we made it. Toby jumped out, and for the first time in a few days, sprinted ahead. Not fast, not wild, just excited. The treehouse still stood. Barely. The wood was weathered, but the rope ladder had been replaced. Someone had kept it alive. Toby waited at the base while I climbed up. Inside, everything was smaller than I remembered, but only physically. Emotionally, it still felt vast. The drawings on the wall, faded but visible. A worn beanbag, an old flashlight, and in the corner, a shoebox sealed in duct tape. I opened it. Inside was a folded map of all the places we'd been over the past weeks, each one marked with a red X. Each one from the letters, from the memories, from Toby. And on top of the map, a note in Dad's handwriting. "Jack, Toby did what I couldn't. He stayed. He remembered. He brought you back to everything that matters. You've walked every step with him. Now just walk with him a little longer. There's no more treasure to find, because the real treasure is sitting beside you." I looked down through the window. Toby was lying on his side in the shade, tail gently tapping the dirt. We stayed in that clearing for hours. I came down and sat with him, leaning against the base of the tree, watching the sun dip through the leaves. I still had one letter left. But something told me it wasn't time to open it yet. Toby would let me know when it was. Toby slept in the back of the truck, while I sat at the base of the treehouse, the last light of the day stretching shadows across the clearing. I still hadn't opened the final letter. I could feel it in my jacket pocket, folded carefully, edges soft from the weight of time and travel. But I wasn't ready, and Toby hadn't given me the signal yet. We stayed at the clearing until the stars came out, then drove to a nearby rest stop. I pulled off the road and parked under a crooked oak. No lights, just the quiet chorus of crickets and the occasional rustle of wind. Toby hopped out, stretched, then curled up beside the front tire, chin on his paws. I grabbed my sleeping bag, laid it beside him, and lay down. I didn't say anything. Neither did he. In the morning, I made coffee with my camp stove and poured some into the lid like I used to do with Dad. Toby watched me, eyes half-lidded, tail wagging faintly. He seemed tired that day, slower to get up, his steps more measured, but he didn't seem in pain, just older. I didn't ask him to lead. This time I just drove. We passed the familiar signs, places we'd already visited, Stillwater, Pine Hollow, even the overlook off Route 14. And then, about 3 hours later, we reached the one place we hadn't returned to since this whole journey began. Home. The garage looked exactly how I left it. Half-sorted boxes stacked against the wall. A broom still leaning in the corner. The old box, the one Toby had first guarded with his life, was now empty, the contents spread across this new chapter of our lives. Memories returned to light. I brought Toby inside. He padded to the living room and lay down on the rug, head between his paws. The red flannel blanket was still there, folded neatly on the couch. I draped it over him. That evening, Susan came over. She hadn't seen Toby in weeks, and when she did, her expression softened. She sat beside him and rubbed behind his ears. "You've been busy, huh, old boy?" she whispered. "Took your dad on the grand tour." We talked for hours. I told her everything. The map in the treehouse, the photo in Halber Grove, the jar at Miller's Trail, the whistle, the fairgrounds. She listened without interrupting, eyes wide and shiny. "You need to write this down," she said eventually. "All of it. This isn't just your story. It's his, too." I nodded. "I will." After she left, I sat beside Toby with the last letter in my lap. Still unopened. Still waiting. I looked at him. "Not yet?" He blinked slowly. No tail wag, no bark. So I waited. The next morning was quiet. I woke up before dawn, made scrambled eggs for us both, and shared mine with Toby. He ate slowly, but finished every bite. Afterward, he walked to the back door and sat. I opened it, and he stepped outside onto the porch. He looked at me, then at the yard, then back at me. And I knew. We drove north, back to where it all started. The cabin. The drive took most of the day, and the trees had turned gold and rust around us, painting the road in autumn. When we pulled up the gravel drive, Toby stood, ears perked. We went inside, and everything was just as we'd left it. The notebook still on the table, the letters back in their box. The photo album open to the picture of the truck ride from so long ago. Toby lay by the fire. I lit it. Then I sat across from him, pulled the final letter from my pocket, and unfolded it. I didn't read it aloud. I just let it sit in my lap, the words sinking in. "If this is the last one, then you've done everything right. This letter isn't about a place. It's about a moment, and this is that moment. When you sit with him, no more clues, no more digging, no more trails, just stillness, just being. That's all he's ever asked of you. That's love." I looked over at Toby. He wasn't asleep. He was watching me. And in his eyes was everything I needed to know. So I lay down on the rug next to him. He shifted slightly, rested his chin on my arm, and exhaled. I didn't cry. Not then. Because this wasn't goodbye. This was just part of the walk. And I wasn't done walking it with him. Not yet. The next morning, the fire had burned down to soft embers. The cabin was quiet, except for the occasional crack of the logs shifting in the hearth. Toby was still beside me, his body warm under the red flannel blanket. I hadn't moved all night. I hadn't wanted to. He opened one eye and gave me the smallest of tail wags. It was slow, gentle, enough to say, "I'm here." I sat up slowly and rested my hand on his back. He didn't stir, but he leaned into the touch. The sun came up a little after 7. Light poured through the front windows in a wide gold stripe that reached all the way across the floor. Toby shifted again, moving toward it, as if soaking in that warmth mattered more than anything. I made breakfast, splitting it with him like always. Then we sat outside, on the porch overlooking the trees that swayed like waves in the wind. We watched birds dance between branches. A squirrel darted across the railing, and for a moment, Toby's ears perked. Just for a second. We stayed like that for hours. I read from the notebook again, some of Dad's early entries, ones I hadn't paid much attention to before, stories about how he knew Toby was special from the start, how he always believed dogs saw the world the way we forgot to. Toby isn't just a dog. He's a reminder, Dad wrote, of what home feels like, of what loyalty really means. He's the echo of everything good. By midday, Toby was tired. Not just sleepy, tired in that deep, whole-body way. He laid down on the porch, his head resting on his paws, his breathing slow and steady. I laid the blanket down beside him again. He didn't lift his head, just gave one soft sigh. I sat with him, talked to him about everything we'd done, every place we'd visited, every treasure we'd found, every memory we'd recovered. I told him how proud I was, how grateful. I told him how much I loved him. Then I opened my phone and pulled up the voice recordings. I'd been keeping notes ever since we left home that first morning, the day he bit me over a box. I'd recorded details I didn't want to forget, his reactions, my thoughts. Even the silences, the soft background sounds of the road. I played the one from the fairgrounds, the moment I'd found the ribbon. My voice was choked up, but you could hear the smile. I watched Toby's ear twitch faintly as the sound played. When the recording ended, I reached into my bag and took out the photo from Stillwater, the one of me and Toby on the dock. I held it where he could see it. His eyes didn't move, but I swear he knew. By sunset, his breathing slowed. I sat with him in silence, and as the last of the daylight dipped behind the trees, he gave one last breath. Slow, deep, and then nothing. I stayed with him long after. There was no rush, no one waiting, no next place to go. Just this. Just him. When the stars were out, and the sky had turned dark and still, I wrapped him in the blanket and carried him to the trail behind the cabin, the one we'd walked a dozen times. At the fork where the pines opened into a small clearing, I stopped. There was a patch of soft earth, a perfect circle of light from the moon above. I dug slowly, gently, carefully. When I laid him down, I placed the whistle beside him, the compass from the jar, the photo from the dock, and the letter, the final one. I covered it all and smoothed the dirt, then sat with him one more time. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The next morning, I went back to the cabin and gathered every note, every photo, every letter, and started putting it all together. Scanning, organizing, printing. I spent the week at the cabin doing what Susan told me to do. writing it down. Toby's story. Our story. And when I finally left the cabin for good, I took one last look at the trail. Then I climbed into the truck, turned the key, and said out loud, "Lead the way, buddy." It was quiet. But I swear, I felt his tail wag just once. And I smiled, because he'd already shown me the way home.